So, good evening everybody. Tonight we're gonna talk about actually the title is anisocytosis and poikilocytosis, but there seemed to be a mix-up. So tonight we're gonna use Sir Ray Perez's PowerPoint because it's a very comprehensive one. So thank you, Sir Ray, for donating, letting me use your PowerPoint. So we're gonna talk about the normal and abnormal distribution of RBC, normal morphology. This is more of the morphologic features, no? This has overlap with your previous topic, and poikilocytosis, and also anisocytosis. So where do we check? Where do we study, or where do we analyze our blood smear, peripheral blood smear? First, we need to check the area where there is no overlap, no overlap. You can clearly see the distinct cellular outline of each and every red blood cell. There is enough space. Of course, there's gonna be some occasional touching, but it's minimal, So, as we all remember, our red cell has an inherent charge which we call your zeta potential. This zeta potential, they all have this charge, and this zeta potential tends to push them apart, so that they don't stick together, So that's the point of zeta potential, because in the circulation, if you have a clump together RBC, that's gonna cause a lot of problems. That's gonna block lots of small blood vessels. So this is a very poor area to check your blood smear. You can see the clumps of your red cells, and then also you can see that your WBCs are somewhat constricted. They're compact. We can't clearly delineate their nucleus. Like over here, they're quite spread out. So Rouleaux. So this happens when they're biconcave. This is a biconcave disc. Their biconcave spaces oppose one another. This occurs when there is increased plasma protein in cases of your inflammation, when there is increased fibrinogen. So what happens is the zeta potential is being overridden by this increased plasma proteins, leading to the binding, or not necessarily binding, but stacking of your red blood cells. This is primarily due to, of course, in the case of your erythrocyte sedimentation rate, this is due to gravity. So due to the increased plasma proteins, the zeta potential is being overridden. So what does Rouleaux even mean? It just simply means a stack of coins. Toara, Rouleaux. So next we have agglutination. So versus your Rouleaux, agglutination occurs when there is an agglutinogen. There is an agent that binds your red blood cells together. The most common cause for agglutination is your antibodies. So if we have a wrong cross match, and then you will be given wrong RBCs, by which your serum antibodies, they will bind to your RBCs, clumping them together and eventually activating the complement against them. So that's what happens. We also have what we call your auto-agglutination. You have your auto antibodies, meaning anong auto-antibodies are antibodies that are directed against your own mga cells, not necessarily just your red cells, but also your tissues, like your collagen in the context of your lupus, your basement membrane. So One example is your cold agglutinin disease. If you become cold, no, the temperature is cold, then you tend to have bouts of hemolytic anemia because of this cold agglutination. So when there is agglutination, manggod, when there is agglutination, the cells tend to get bigger. Their mass tends to become bigger, and then they're gonna have a hard time passing through small caliber blood vessels, leading to hemolysis, no? So of course there's gonna be an increase in your MCV, mean corpuscular volume. So that is the basis for our size greater than 100 MCV. So dako siya volume, no? 100 or 110 depends on the book that you're reading. Sometimes this is caused by your atypical pneumoniae or your hemolytic anemias. Wala siya, agglutination. So how do you differentiate your Rouleaux from your agglutination, no? Agglutination tends to be clumped, no? Morphologically, the way they look is really different. Your Rouleaux is just really a stack of red blood cells. So, biconcave disc, uniform in size, no inclusion, central polar should not be more than 1/3 of the cell. Poikilocytes, mature red blood cell data. Poikilocytosis simply means a deviation from the normal morphology. Kung nalahi siya og nawong. Anisocytosis simply means variation in the size, no? So we have microcytic and then normocytic, and then we have macroovalocytes, no? Okay, so normochromic, clear central pallor, less than 1/3. Hypochromic, mag-ingon kag hypochromic if it is greater than 1/3 to 2/3, no, of the cell. So kanimong cell dapat siya, more or less than 1/3. Pag dako na kayo ang rim, central pallor, that's already what we call hypochromic, no? Hyperchromic, lack of a central pallor. Sometimes we call them ghost cells, but depende maguna. Ang ghost cells dagag meaning, dagag overlap. One book I read before, it's what we call ghost cell. Sometimes we call them ring cells na lang, no? So there's a lot of kanang mga nomenclature, but we'll just call them hypochromic and hyperchromic. Sorry. Hyperchromic is a lack of lack of central pallor, meaning wala na central pallor, just lingin lang siya. So what happens here, what happens with hyperchromic, instead na nakay central pallor, is just around. So it's not just associated with macrocytosis, it's also associated with your hereditary spherocytosis, because there is no longer a central pallor, because due to the loss of vertical support, no? So nisaka na ning central pallor, it popped out, it's just a pure sphere, no? So that's what we call hyperchromic. So MCHC is elevated by true hypochromia. So MCHC just simply means the amount of hemoglobin inside each RBC, no? So since nawala ng central pallor na to, you can fit more hemoglobin inside. So that's why MCHC is increased. So one of the examples for hyperchromic is hemolytic anemia. So kato siya, MCHC increased in hereditary spherocytosis and sometimes macrocytosis. Normocytic, normal ang size. So how can you say normocytic? The red blood cell is more or less equal to the nucleus of a small lymphocyte. So that's a rough estimate, no? So but the numerical value, no, is your MCV. So it's usually 80 to 100 or 110 femtoliters, no? Macrocytic, the diameter is 8.5 to 9, no, and it exceeds more or less mga 100, so 100, 110 usually, So what is the cause for your macrocytic? Low vitamin B12, alcoholism, or so anything that affects red cell maturation. So like the recurring theme that I have been going on, no, is that your cells tend to get smaller as they mature. So large cells tend to be more immature. So there is lack of maturation in your macrocytic cells. Microcytic, 80 or less than, so 46 man usually imuhang ano, so less than 4 I guess, ang diameter. So if the MCV is, so how do you compare your microcytic, if this is the nucleus of your small lymphocyte, so that's your small lymphocyte over here, you just need to compare the RBC. If more or less it's the same, then it's most probably normocytic, and if it's larger, it's macrocytic. If smaller, it's microcytic. So that's a rough estimate in your peripheral blood smear. But of course, the numbers don't lie, no? So we should really check the numerical value, and that is our MCV, mean corpuscular volume. This simply means how big, no? What is the volume of per red blood cell. So spherocyte lack a central pallor and appear to have increased hemoglobin, no? So we have leptocytes thinner than normal. So these are your thin boys, no? They still have their central pallor, but their katong outer ring is quite smaller. So we can find them in thalassemia, hemoglobin C, and steatorrhea. So this is your discocyte. This is your normal. And this is your leptocyte. Thin. Over here, no? Thin po siya. Dako pa siya central pallor, no? So sometimes the central pallor of the leptocyte is more than 2/3, no? It's really big. It's still associated with anemias gyapon. And this is your spherocyte. Wala na siya, central pallor. Poikilocytosis secondary to membrane abnormalities, trauma, and abnormal hemoglobin content. So stomatocytes, naibaba. So one of the funny, kanang cute na ako ang mga mnemonics is stomato na siya baba para mukaon og tomato. So this is due to the lack of stomatin, no? And this lack of stomatin tends to increase intracellular water content, pushing the central pallor to a slit-like space. Kinatambok naman siya, no? So it's usually alcoholism, usually a defect in your sodium-potassium transport ratio. More sodium inside, that's why water is inside the red cell. Mo na siya baba, slit-like space. Pwede na siya makaon tomato. Tomato. You also have your ovalocytes, and we have your elliptocytes. Kani sila may guys, no? The most common times that you're gonna see them is in your ovalocytes is same lang gihapon, B12 deficiency, or what we call your megaloblastic anemia. Megaloblastic anemia simply means that they're big and they're blastic, meaning they're big and immature. Megaloblastic, so ovalocyte, macro-ovalocyte. They're large. No? You also have your elliptocytes, no? So we have an inherent problem with your elliptocytosis, your hereditary elliptocytosis. So elliptocytosis can be a problem with both the structural, there is no longer horizontal support, or anything that messes up with the content. What is the content of your red blood cell? It's just hemoglobin. So IDA, decrease imong hemoglobin content, no? Myeloptysic, hemoglobin C, they mess up also your hemoglobin content. That's why the shape gets altered. Same with water. With a water balloon. If you're gonna put kanang viscous na fluid or kanang sloggy na fluid, of course it's different than, and then you put it on the floor, of course it's gonna tend to be more flat, no? But if you put water inside or air, it's gonna be more taut. So I'm not saying that it's a direct example. I'm saying is, if you're gonna, basically the red blood cell is just a balloon that holds hemoglobin that is shaped like a biconcave disc. But if the contents are crazy or kanang improper, or there's problems with the contents, of course the overall shape is also gonna suffer, no? So hereditary elliptocytosis, deficient or defective spectrin, problematic, horizontal support, decreased thermal stability, siya, elliptocytes. So we also have your crenated RBCs, no, your echinocytes. Usually artifactual with the increase of EDTA na ratio. This is due to the high osmotic or daghan kag osmotic content sa imong anticoagulant. You have lots of dissolved solutes from your anticoagulant. That's why they crenate. We also have your Burr cells. This is different. There is minimal difference with your crenated echinocytes and Burr cells, no. But the problem is your Burr cells is associated with uremia, no, and pyruvate kinase deficiency. We're gonna see over here. This is your echinocyte. But more or less, they're the same features with your Burr cells, no. So, personally for me, when I see echinocytes in the lab, no, I just take note of them. But if echinocytosis is, if daga na kay echinocytes, sometimes I pa-repeat. Ginapa-repeat na ko buhat ng peripheral blood smear with a new specimen, a new collection of blood, so that to make sure that the mixing of your EDTA is adequate, no, it's optimal, no? So that we can avoid any artifactual echinocytosis, no. Kung tinuod jud siya na Burr cell jud siya, then it's good. Then we can diagnose it. But if it's just artifactual, it's really hard to differentiate your echinocytes and your Burr cells. You also have your acanthocytes, irregularly spaced thorn-like projections, usually with the bulbous end. So, can't remain normal shape. It's a beta lipoproteinemia. So, we have decreased beta lipoproteins that is associated with incorporating your lipid in your cell membrane. That's why nabuang na imong cell membrane. We also have your Spur cells, severe hemolytic anemia with cirrhosis with sharp points. So what happens with cirrhosis? Your plasma proteins have become bonkers, no? And if napay hemolytic anemia, what happens if walay unod na kaayo in the cases of your IDA, iron deficiency anemia, your red blood cells, if they become hypochromic, kung wala siya unod, then you can form it any way you could, no? So, same gyapon, same example with a balloon. If gamay lang ang hangin sa balloon, you can form it anything you want. If there's air inside, it's stout, no? You can't form it any way you like. So, acanthocytes, a beta lipoproteinemia, there's a bulbous end. This is your Spur cell, sharp edges. Podocyte, target cells, no? Mexican hat. It's always associated with thalassemia, no? More or less always associated with thalassemia. Mexican hat, ano man na siya. If you're gonna look at a Mexican hat, ano siya. It's like a bullseye also. Teardrop cells, problem ani myelofibrosis ni sila. So when the red blood cells go out of the bone marrow, no? When they go out of the bone marrow, usually the bone marrow pores, no, the bone pores are usually big enough for them to go out. But if it's very small, it tends to squeeze the red blood cell going out, leaving them with a tail. Some of them die, no? Some of them hemolyze, but some of them survive, especially if they're still young and cute. So that's why it's teardrop, like a teardrop. Yung mga gangster ganin ay teardrop yun. So, schizocytes or schizocytes, no? So, RBC fragments, hemolytic anemia. So, this occurs when, example, you have arteriovenous shunt, no? So, what happens with your arteriovenous shunt? So, this is an artery directly connecting to a vein. Kusog man kayo ng pressure sa imong artery and your vein has somewhat of a small less pressure. So, kusog kayong bangga diya sa RBC and kalit na siya muhinay. Eventually, they're gonna fracture. Some of them will fragment rather. And then, sometimes, in your microangiopathic hemolytic anemia, your blood cells are very narrow. Sometimes na yung mga maipit, na ma-chip off, ma-fragment ang red blood cells. So, that's why you can have your schistocytes. They're also called helmet cells, no? Because they look like helmets. Keratocyte, one or more horn, rare phenomenon associated with DIC. So it's G6PD also. It's your keratocyte. Microspherocytes and pyropoikilocytes, no? So this is a red blood cell. No? So that's what it is, no? So there are no small round cells occurring in severe burns. I think the name speaks for itself. Pyropoikilocytes, flame, burns, or fever pod sometimes. Hereditary pyropoikilocytosis, there are problems with your alpha and beta spectrin on the membrane. What happens is your red cell is very sensitive to heat. That's why once exposed to severe heat like burns or fever, they tend to do another morphology. They change a morphology. So that's why ito. So we also have your poikilocytes secondary to abnormal hemoglobin content. We have your sickle cells. No? This occurs when there is polymerization of your hemoglobin. There is a shift between valine and glutamine in your hemoglobin sequence, no, leading to polymerization of the hemoglobin when exposed to hypoxic conditions. That's why it becomes a sickle drepanocyte. Problem in drepanocyte, since bati silang nawong sickle, once they flow into tight blood vessels, they tend to clog it, no, leading to ischemia and necrosis. Hemoglobin CC crystals, we're gonna talk about this in your second sem. Hemoglobin SC crystals, Washington. So Washington monument looks like this. Your CC crystals look like this. It's the same as your drepanocytes, no. Your hemoglobin S. It's just abnormal polymerization of your hemoglobin. So hemoglobin C, SC, no. So open book, sometimes open book, or Washington monument. Agglutination, Howell-Jolly bodies, nucleus, no, positive in Fulgen tests. So that's our fragments of nucleus. Basophilic stippling. So this is usually due to lead poisoning and pyrimidine 5 nucleotides. So how do you differentiate your basophilic stippling? You can use the only way you can see your Howell-Jolly sometimes with Fulgen. It's really hard to see them in your right stain, but your basophilic stippling is apparent in your right stain. So usually it's just basophilic stippling like this one. Sometimes it's called a pitted golf ball, no, your basophilic stippling. Also have your Pappenheimer bodies. So basta Pappenheimer periphery, PP, no, and it's positive with Pearl's Prussian blue because it has iron. It's our iron contents. It has iron. Cabot rings is your remnant of your mitotic spindle seen in megaloblastic anemia, further solidifying the point that megaloblastic anemia is due to lack of maturation. Nabilin pa ang iyang mitotic spindle. Heinz bodies, Heinz bodies da itong golf ball. Basophilic stippling is finer. Heinz bodies usually found in your G6PD. So that's what happens. So what is G6PD? A short lecture. G6PD is a enzyme deficiency that will lead to lack of reduction of your glutathione. Glutathione is a very strong antioxidant, and then the presence of oxidizing agents like your radical oxygen species or radiation, your hemoglobin tends to clump together. So glutathione aids in avoiding the clumping of your hemoglobin. So that's why if wala kay G6PD, hemoglobin tends to clump together and form these Heinz bodies, giving off a pitted golf ball. Hemoglobin H inclusions, no? So we're gonna talk about that. Hemoglobin H, alpha thalassemia, meaning beta chains lang ang nasa imuhang hemoglobin. There is no alpha. It's usually dili mabuhi usually ang mga bata ani. So we also have protozoan inclusions, your plasmodium, brought about by your anopheles. Schaffner's stippling usually is found in your vivax. So malariae, falciparum, and ovale. This is usually from your falciparum. Gametocyte lang, falciparum. This is schizont, ring form. Yeah, schizont, ring form, vivax. And babesiosis, Babesia microti. So we have a tetrad. Sometimes we call this a Maltese cross, no, in your Babesia. It's an intracellular na parasite. This one. Thank you for listening, guys. So, hulog na kayo. If you have any questions, feel free to PM me lang. And more or less, katong lecture ni Doc Pao, makover na mo duha. It's just good to put more emphasis and give more input regarding mga topics cause mag-recur pa ni siya in your Hema 2. So, happy aral guys. God bless.